12. Navigating 4 possible call outcomes. Staying with our tennis analogy from earlier in the section, the serving players in tennis face several possible scenarios. They might win the point outright by hitting an ace or by their opponent missing the return. Or they might get an easy second shot they can convert into a winner, either at the net or by hitting a ground stroke. Their opponents could also hit very strong returns that put the server on the defensive, making it harder to recover from and get back into a rally. And doubles players will have to factor in their second opponents at the net by either hitting around the net players or engaging them head-on. Sound familiar? When cold calling a new business prospect, you also need to navigate several different possible situations that can broadly be categorized into 4 outcomes, summarized in Figure 12.1. 1. Your prospect agrees to the face-to-face meeting right away. 2. Your prospect doesn't pick up the phone. 3. You're routed to a gatekeeper. 4. Your prospect voices one or several objections. The fact that you're interrupting someone's busy schedule with a phone call he or she was not expecting, and in that second most likely didn't want to receive, means that the cards are not stacked in your favor. Of the 4 possible outcomes, the one where you walk prospects through your relevant business reason, and they are so immediately impressed by it that they suggest scheduling a meeting, is in the clear minority. If that wasn't the case, cold calling reluctance would probably not exist. Your prospect says yes. The buyer picked up the phone, and you had chosen the right RBR that interested the prospect enough to agree to meet with you face-to-face, either on a video call or in person. You would think it's easy from here, and it should be. However, I've observed too many salespeople talk themselves out of a meeting the prospect had already agreed to. That's why I must caution you unequivocally. Get off the phone. Right after your qualified prospect agreed to meet with you is not the right time to start asking questions. There's no need to start a mini discovery meeting over the phone. You will be able to do that more effectively in person, in what will be a much more relaxed atmosphere. Remember, you just interrupted the prospect only a couple of minutes earlier. It's also not the right time to start talking about how great your company, product, or service is, or to go into details about how the idea you just presented as part of your RBR will work. Clearly, you already intrigued the person on the other line enough to score the meeting. Hold these details until your face-to-face meeting. Coordinate the meeting. All you have to do after the prospect's yes is to agree to the exact date, time, and place of the meeting. If the meeting is with a prospect who is not located in your time zone, make sure to confirm the time. You should also always clarify whether you are meeting in person or on a video or conference call. If your company has an office built to impress, potentially even centrally located and easy for your prospect to reach, and you can convince them to meet you there, you will have an advantage. An office tour, including an introduction to senior executives or, if you work in media, even well-known on-air personalities, can be a great icebreaker with someone you're meeting for the first time and will go a long way toward establishing rapport with the prospect. Regardless of how you will meet, after you verify the prospect's contact information, including email address and direct office line, make sure to ask, is there anyone else on your end who should be in the meeting? Then get those people's email addresses as well. Send a meeting invitation. Once you get off the phone, send a meeting invitation to all attendees, including the location of the meeting or video call details. I use the subject line, name of prospect, and name of your company partnership meeting or video call. In our case study of Rebecca Jims, the subject line on the Outlook invitation would say, Rebecca Jims and NYC Media Partnership Video Call. The length of the meeting invitation will vary by industry. As mentioned, I personally prefer 45 minutes. I also try to schedule more face-to-face meetings on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and fewer on Mondays and Fridays. Why? Because at this point in the sales process, when you have no personal relationship with the prospect, new business meetings are usually the first to get canceled or rescheduled. And the risk of this happening on a day right before or after the weekend is higher in my experience. Send confirmation email. Some salespeople are hesitant to confirm new business meetings with prospects a day in advance, thinking that reminding them of the meeting might actually result in the opposite, a request to reschedule, or, even worse, a cancellation. I never bought into this theory. If you want to come across as a professional business person, confirming a meeting a day in advance will show prospects that you consider your own time at least as precious as theirs. If your meeting will be conducted via video call, remind the prospect of that. The last thing you want is your meeting to turn into a basic conference call, making it harder for you to build a relationship and impossible to share information on a screen. Consider giving the prospect a pre-meeting assignment. Nothing major, of course, but you could assign something that is just enough to get the person involved in the process even before you meet face-to-face. You might ask the prospect to read a relevant article, or you could mention certain things in your meeting confirmation email you're planning to cover during the meeting, with the expectation that the prospect give them some thought before the meeting. A prepared prospect is a better prospect, but you need to ask the person to prepare. Odds are they won't do it on their own. Case study. Confirmation email to Rebecca Jims. Here is how a confirmation email to Tracy Ranner, Chief Marketing Officer of Rebecca Jims, might look. Hi Tracy, I'm looking forward to a video call tomorrow at 2 p.m. I've done as much research as I could on Rebecca Jims in preparation for our meeting, but do have a few more questions about your marketing strategy and plans that I wanted to go over on the call. I want to make sure I 100% understand what your needs, challenges, and KPIs are. I'm also planning to share some relevant case studies and category insights, as well as NYC Media's analytics tools. I added a Microsoft Teams link to the invite for you to easily access the video call. No need to install anything, though all you need to do is click the link. Please feel free to invite anyone else on your team who you think should be part of our call. Talk to and see you tomorrow. Voicemails are part of your sales campaign. We have all been there before. We've all questioned if leaving voicemails is really worth it. It's just a waste of time. Nobody ever calls me back. I don't think people are even listening to voicemail. The more voicemails I leave with the same prospect, the more of a pest I become. For years I struggled over whether to leave voice messages. There certainly was a time in my sales career when I decided against them. My main argument was that I didn't want to block myself from cold calling a prospect again during my next cold call session, either the same or the next day. I felt that leaving a voicemail in the morning and following up with another call in the afternoon would be interpreted as overly aggressive if the prospect picked up the second call. Then it occurred to me one day that no prospect actually ever complained about it. Way more often, they apologized for not getting back to me. Voicemails as short radio commercials. What really changed my mind over time was when I started to think about voicemails less as a vehicle to get people to call me back, and more as a tool to deliver one additional sales and marketing impression to a prospect. Working in the radio industry, I started to look at voicemail messages as 15 to 20-second long radio commercials. And, much as I might achieve with a radio commercial, I figured the awareness and familiarity of me and the company I was representing would increase with every additional voicemail impression. I also stopped looking at not receiving a callback as a failure or a setback. I expected it. It didn't bother me because my overall goal to set up a face-to-face meeting with the prospect remained the same. Whether I achieved it because prospects ended up responding to a seed email I sent after hearing my voicemail didn't matter to me. I looked at it as one comprehensive heavy metal outreach campaign, 2 weeks long, with different tactics that complemented each other. We all know that it takes a number of touches to break through. Voicemails are just one more of them. This doesn't mean you should leave a voicemail every time you're calling a prospect. As you've already seen, a 2-week outreach campaign includes 3 to 4 voicemails. This number is only reasonable if you switch up your voicemail message accordingly, using different RBRs to stay engaging. Otherwise, you will very quickly become a pest. That said, there is no doubt that leaving voicemails, or more accurately, waiting for callbacks, can be frustrating. So is the fact that many decision makers rarely pick up the phone in the first place, sending the majority of cold calls to voicemail. But is voicemail less effective now than a decade ago? I don't believe so. The fact that these days audio files of your voicemails are being forwarded to a buyer's email inbox actually helps you, because prospects will receive voicemails faster and your chances of them actually listening to your message are higher. In certain industries, for example technology, and at startups with many younger buyers, you might find it a bit harder to get a call returned. You will encounter voice messages like, "I'm not listening to voicemail," more often, or situations when you literally can't leave a voicemail because the buyer's inbox is full. Some buyers will just think that if a salesperson has a really important reason to call, they will try again soon, and as a result, the buyers won't call back themselves. Having the right voicemail mindset. For voicemail, as with any outreach method, perseverance will make the difference and maximize your chances of getting a call back. Shift your mindset to voicemail is a real weapon for me. Embrace it, be positive about it. Make sure your energy level is high and don't come across like someone who's just doing a job. Never get angry and show frustration. It will never help you. The only time I would recommend easing up on voicemail is when prospects change their voicemail to an out-of-office or vacation message. You don't want them to come back to work checking tons of voicemail messages from different vendors, with your voicemail stuck somewhere between the 16th and the 19th messages, never to be fully heard. It is totally fine to include some humor, especially after several outreach attempts haven't resulted in a callback. I once met a salesperson who, after a few weeks of leaving voicemails with the same prospect, would leave one that mentioned something like, "Every time before I go to bed, I talk to God. Why can't I talk to you?" Will this work for every sales style? Of course not. But figure out what type of humor could work for you and use it in the right situation. It's much better than sounding too polished or like a telemarketing robot. Lastly, make sure your phone connection is up to standard and that your message will come across clearly. It is mind-boggling how often I receive voicemails that I want to understand but simply can't because they were left from someone's cell phone while the caller was walking in windy weather outside or was calling from a car. Leave your outreach voicemails from your office phone. Voicemails must be short. So what should an effective voicemail include? Essentially, what you would say if you had the prospect on the phone live, just shorter. Plus, make it as easy as possible for the prospect to call you back. Your message needs to stand out. Stick to one of the RBRs you came up with during your prep work and focus on the most relevant part of it. Think of how you tease an email with a concise and effective subject line, or how you shorten your RBR for a LinkedIn message. Some salespeople go on and on for over a minute, which is bad salesmanship in general, but even worse when the buyer gets the voicemail forwarded to their email where the length of the audio file is visible. Anything longer than 30 seconds screams delete before they even start listening. And, worse than deleting it, the buyer will remember it was you who left that lengthy message. Your voicemail should under no circumstances be longer than 20 seconds. Sometimes salespeople say that's just not possible. My answer, the Pledge of Allegiance is shorter than that. Are you saying your message is more important than the Pledge of Allegiance? Brevity with voicemail is key. There should be no wasted words, no long transitioning to what you want to accomplish, no job titles. Like Mark Hunter writes in High Profit Prospecting, "Do you think the other person cares you're a vice president of the North-South District in the Western region?" Well said. Include your callback number 3 times. Include your callback number once at the beginning of the voicemail, so prospects don't have to play back the entire message once they decide to call you back. Then include it twice more at the end of your message. You will need to decide if it makes more sense to give your office number or a cell phone number. What's better for you depends on your particular setup. I leave my cell phone number simply because I'm on the road a lot and want to maximize my chances to be able to pick up a return call. Effective voicemail framework. Similar to how we broke down cold calls and seed emails into their components, Figure 12.2 shows the framework of an effective voicemail message. As with cold calls, it's perfectly acceptable to write a precise voicemail script in preparation. If you're not comfortable working with scripts, you should at least write down quick talking points. Then practice, practice, practice. With voicemails, that's actually very easy to do. Leave yourself a voicemail and listen to it. Chances are you'll hear something that you can improve on. Have a coworker listen to it. Time it. You will be surprised how long messages actually are. even if you told yourself to be concise several times before you picked up the phone. One last lesson on voicemails. Always enter the RBR you used into your CRM and be prepared when your prospect calls back. That's often easier said than done, since you probably have left several voicemails with different companies using various RBRs over a short time. It can get confusing. You have to be able to think quickly on your feet, especially if you get the call back on your cell phone and are not at your desk. Case study. Voicemail script for Rebecca Jims. Here's a potential voicemail message to Rebecca Jims' CMO Tracy Ranner, broken down into its components. Step 1, greeting. Tracy. Step 2, identification. This is Dave Gahan with NYC Media. Step 3, phone number. At 646-765-XXXX. Step 4, RBR. We recently helped Weiss Studio launch their 10 new locations here in New York, and as a result, they surpassed their membership goals by 43%. Step 5, ask for callback. I'd love to share some potential learnings for your upcoming New York launch. Step 6, name and phone number. Tracy, please give me a call at 646-765-XXXX. Again, this is Dave Gahan, NYC Media, 646-765-XXXX. The entire voicemail script would therefore look like this. Tracy, this is Dave Gahan with NYC Media at 646-765-XXXX. We recently helped Weiss Studio launch their 10 new locations here in New York, and as a result, they surpassed their membership goals by 43%. I'd love to share some potential learnings for your upcoming New York launch. Tracy, please give me a call at 646-765-XXXX. Again, this is Dave Gahan, NYC Media, 646-765-XXXX. Befriending gatekeepers. Most salespeople have a negative reaction when they hear the word gatekeeper. Who can blame them? It's not like gatekeepers have endeared themselves to the sales profession over the last few decades. They certainly can become obstacles, standing in the way of a meeting with a buyer. If it weren't for the gatekeeper blocking me, I would have already made the sale, something we've probably all told ourselves at one time. However, sales champions consistently find a way to engage gatekeepers in the sales process, potentially even turning them into allies and internal coaches along the way. How are they doing it? They're ultimately just following advice they first received when they were about 6 years old, and their mothers told them to treat every human being with the utmost respect. Yes, gatekeepers are people like you and me, with real lives, emotions, and problems of their own. They're just trying to get their jobs done, like you. They can have a variety of roles, from the executive assistant who knows the company's strategy and secrets better than anyone else, to the receptionist who was told not to let any salespeople walk by the reception desk. All of them have one thing in common. They want to protect their bosses, or more specifically, their boss's time. Be open and transparent with gatekeepers. The best way to engage gatekeepers is to be friendly and start a conversation with them. You want to establish a dialogue that, in a best-case scenario, eventually turns them into your friend and helper. For this relationship to get off to a good start, you have to be as transparent about your intentions as possible from the beginning. Be upfront about who you are and where you're calling from. I've met many salespeople over the years who are proud of their long list of tricks to get past the gatekeeper. In the end, this just made them look like, well, salespeople. Not to mention that the vast majority of times these tricks backfired on them and did nothing else but hurt their credibility. If you are not transparent off the bat, the gatekeeper will absolutely ask you the dreaded question, what's this in regard to? Instead of getting defensive and potentially even trying to intimidate and almost demand the meeting, you shouldn't be in this position in the first place. Treat gatekeepers as if they are the decision makers, using a cold call script with the RBRs you had prepared in advance. Two things will happen. One, the gatekeeper will feel honored or at least thankful for being treated with respect. Two, if your RBR was strong enough, the gatekeeper will be hesitant to turn down what could be a great opportunity for the manager and the company, and will try to minimize her personal risk by actually putting you through. Turning gatekeepers into allies. If the buyer is not available, use the conversation you started with the gatekeeper to your advantage. You can gain many insights by simply asking for help and guidance. When is the best time to reach her? What would you suggest is the best way to earn 45 minutes on his schedule? Who else within the company should I be speaking to about this? Do you ever need tickets to a Yankees game? I'm adding the last question partly in jest, but don't forget gatekeepers are people who have needs. If you have access to tickets to events, concerts, or theme parks, as many salespeople do, why wouldn't you want to offer them? I've had gatekeepers call my cell phone to let me know the buyer was now back in the office and had no meeting scheduled for the next couple of hours. Of course, I jumped in the car and made my way there immediately, dropping off a pair of Mets tickets with the gatekeeper along the way. You can absolutely develop real and positive relationships with gatekeepers before meeting the decision maker. If you did a good job with it, you will have gained a lot of information that will make your first meeting with the buyer so much more productive. Just don't forget about the gatekeeper once you start working directly with the buyer. Nurture this relationship as much as the one with the client. Many salespeople write handwritten thank you notes to their clients. Try the same with gatekeepers and see what it will do for you. How to work around them. If you come across gatekeepers who, despite all your efforts and best intentions, simply do not want to connect you or help you in any way, try to work around them. Most gatekeepers work traditional hours, so calling between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., during the lunch hour, or between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. might get you directly to the buyer, or at least to a different person who might be more accommodating. Try calling the sales department or the accounts receivable department, a tactic we already introduced when we were trying to determine the right phone number to call during the prospecting phase. Salespeople love to talk. They might even identify with your struggles to set up a meeting and help you out of courtesy. The accounts receivable department is eager to collect money and someone is usually picking up the phone. Ask to be connected and there's a good chance the person on the other line will pick up. As mentioned, gatekeepers usually don't have access to their manager's LinkedIn accounts. This outreach tactic can be especially useful in situations where the decision maker is fully walled off from calls or in-person walk-ins. Dismissals, objections, and what to do about them. In Chapter 1, we covered how sales champions deal with rejection. While rejection can happen at any time in the sales process, there are two steps along the way when it happens the most. One is toward the end, when you are trying to finalize a deal and your prospect rejects your proposal. The other time is when you actually get buyers on the phone during a cold call, and they reject your request to meet face-to-face. The feeling of rejection happens the moment you get a dismissal or objection. We will get to the difference between these two shortly. And yes, it sucks. Whether you are a sales veteran with 30 years experience or a 22-year-old in your first sales role, it will throw you a little off your sales game. The key, though, is what you do next. Do you back down immediately and agree to call back in 6 months? Do you ask if it's okay to check back in a few weeks? Or do you stand your ground and, in a calm and professional manner, insist on the meeting, maybe even push back a little? Sales champions do the latter. If there is a time in the entire sales process when it is okay to be a little pushy, this is it. That's why we labeled the connect phase heavy metal sales. If you want to think Metallica, now is the time. But who can blame prospects for rejecting us? For years, they've been getting tortured by salespeople who don't provide any value and are only talking about how great they and their companies are. No wonder people are programmed to put us off and reject us. It's almost a reflex. Just think about your own reaction when you get a cold call from someone you don't know. You're being interrupted, and all you want to do is get back to whatever you were doing. Be ready for resistance. There are several strategies and tactics you can adopt to improve your odds of successfully getting past a dismissal or an objection. Above all, you need to be prepared. That should be a no-brainer, but based on how I hear salespeople responding every day to objections or dismissals on the phone, it clearly is not. There are fewer than a dozen ways for a prospect to tell you no on a cold call. You would think that you can learn a dozen different responses by heart, wouldn't you? You can and you should, but maybe 1 out of 10 salespeople actually do. We will cover script suggestions later in the chapter to do exactly that. Learn them by heart or come up with your own responses and learn them. The point is, you need to be prepared to respond to an objection or dismissal almost automatically, without awkward pauses or trying to search for the right words. If you know in advance that you will run into resistance, and you do, there is no reason not to be ready for it. Be ready to push past it with rehearsed scripts and keep your eye on the goal, getting the face-to-face meeting. If you don't get the meeting, your cold call was not successful. It's as simple as that. Be brutally honest with yourself. Only that mindset, combined with the willingness to be persistent and to ask for the meeting several times on the same call if necessary, will bring you success. At that moment, you will need to have not just one, but several RBRs at your fingertips. What you are selling at this moment is the meeting. You need to make clear that the prospect will benefit from meeting with you. Even if it should turn out that the prospect's company and yours are not the best fit for each other, the prospect will have gained insight and heard about new ideas and may have even found out what the competition is doing. Even if there is no future business relationship, the prospect will have profited from the meeting. That's what you need to convey during the call. Dismissals. Sales champions know how to listen carefully to differentiate between true objections and mere dismissals. Dismissals are a prospect's almost automatic reactions. The person has one goal and one goal only: to get you off the phone and quickly end this interruption of their day. Prospects don't even really think about their response in this second. It doesn't matter to them. I'm not interested. I'm busy. Call me some other time. The nicer ones might give you a glimmer of hope with responses like, I'm interested, please send me some information. They know from experience that most salespeople don't like confrontation either and will go away quietly, so they are trying to let them down easy and not hurt their feelings. Will they ever look at what you send them? Of course not. They only try to make you feel less rejected. Here are the main dismissals you will encounter, including scripts on how to respond. I'm not interested. Got it, and I don't know if we should be doing business or not, Paul. At the same time, I did just receive some new market data that shows where your competitors are planning to shift their marketing dollars next year. Does next Monday early afternoon work for a video call? I promise I won't waste your time. Call me in 6 months. Tom, it's great you guys are planning far in advance, but let me ask you to meet with me anyway next week. I'll share with you how Miller Laser Center was able to increase its call volume by 30% in the last 2 months and show you a couple of ideas that I think can help you immediately as well. Does Tuesday later in the morning work for you? Maybe 11 a.m.? We can meet at your office. I promise I won't waste your time. Our budget is spent for the remainder of the year. Oh, it's way too early to talk about money. I wanted to first share with you what I see some of your competitors doing really well right now and show you a couple of initial ideas that I think can help you. Can you do Monday mid-afternoon at your office, maybe 3 p.m.? I promise I won't waste your time. Can you email me some information? I certainly can. Let's schedule 30 minutes early next week to review it. I'll walk you through what I see working in your industry right now and can answer all questions you might have right there. Is Monday 3 p.m. good for you for a video call? I promise I won't waste your time. I'm busy. I figured you would be, and that's exactly why I called. I want to find a time that works better for you and share with you what I see some of your competitors doing really well right now. How about we get together at your office Tuesday morning instead? 10 a.m. good for you? I promise I won't waste your time. Call my agency. I absolutely will, but let me ask you to meet with me anyway. No one knows your dealership better than you, and I can show you why some of the other Infinity stores in the area had such a great April. Does Tuesday later in the morning work for a video call, maybe 11 a.m.? I promise I won't waste your time. The beginnings of each of the responses and the last sentences are the ones you should know by heart. They don't change depending on the prospect, and I would argue they also don't change depending on the industry you're in. It's not that hard to learn a few different lines, is it? In addition to what you're saying, it's the delivery that matters. It needs to be completely matter of fact. You must not sound like a desperate salesperson, but instead like a business person who is calling about a business proposition. There should be no stuttering or aggressiveness in your voice, just a confident suggestion. As you are delivering your first rehearsed line, you have a couple of seconds to think about the middle part of your response. During this short period, pick your second best RBR, assuming you use the best one to start off the cold call, then deliver it. Suggest time, place, and location again because you most likely already suggested these before you received the dismissal, and finish your response with a line that has worked well for me for almost 2 decades. I promise I won't waste your time. If you get a second no from the prospect, try to follow up with a question. We'll explain this a little more when we go over how to react to an objection. Objections. Objections are different than dismissals. Objections are real reasons prospects are giving you for turning down the meeting, like, we just renewed our annual contract with our current vendor. We are happy with them and are not looking to change. We are committed to XXX and happy with what we have. We're in the middle of executing a huge initiative right now. I can't take on more at this point. Radio does not work for us. We've tried it and it wasn't successful. We've done business with your company before and didn't see the return on investment we need. On the one hand, you can argue objections are easier to handle than dismissals because prospects give you a, most of the time, truthful rebuttal, which means you at least know their position. On the other hand, the fact that they already have some type of opinion of you, your company, or what you are suggesting, and clearly not a positive one, otherwise they would have granted you the meeting, could mean that it might actually be even harder to get them to change their mind. How can anyone seriously expect to change someone else's mind on anything with a 15 to 20 second response over the phone? It's impossible. That is why the best strategy to respond to an objection is to deflect instead of fight. Because of thousands of bad salespeople before you, prospects are expecting salespeople to fight back and try to convince them of their opinions and their arguments. You need to take a different approach. Your strategy is to turn what up until this point was a pretty one-sided conversation, you opening the call with your first RBR, then the prospect answering with an objection, into a true dialogue. The best way to do this is by following the 5-step objection response framework shown in Figure 12.3. 1. You first recognize and acknowledge that you heard the prospect's objection. While this is partly just good manners, it also gives you a few seconds to think about your follow-up. 2. You sympathize with the person, which means you are, in a way, actually agreeing with the prospect. This comes completely unexpected to prospects. Remember, they are expecting you to do the exact opposite, to disagree with them and fight them over whatever they had said. What this does psychologically is to force prospects to pay a little more attention. Your unexpected response just made them lean in a little bit, and that is your chance. 3. At this moment, you have to follow up with an open-ended question that gets prospects to talk, which is exactly what you want. You want them to give you as much information as possible. 4. Based on what prospects are telling you now, your next move is to position yourself and your company in a way that makes it intriguing enough for prospects to agree to meet with you face-to-face. Many times you will do this by using one of your backup RBRs. 5. Now keep your eyes on the prize, the face-to-face meeting, and ask for acceptance of your positioning argument and meeting request. If, during this dialogue with the prospect, we run into a second or even third objection, revert back to the beginning of the objection response framework and start over. Recognize and acknowledge, sympathize, ask an open-ended question, position, and ask for acceptance and a meeting. Case study: Rebecca Jim's objection response. You were finally able to get CMO Tracy Ranner on the phone. You opened with the in-segment success story RBR cold call script from Chapter 8, highlighting NYC Media's work with Weiss 7 Studio in New York, and asked to schedule a video call for next week. Unfortunately, but not unexpectedly, Tracy responded like this: "We will really be relying on PR efforts during the launch and not on traditional media. There's really no need for a meeting at this point." Using the 5-step objection response framework, you try to turn the call into a dialogue. Step 1, recognize and acknowledge. 100% PR focus, got it. Step 2, sympathize. And that makes sense. There is no question that word of mouth is a very organic and effective way to stand out from all the advertising messages people are exposed to daily. Step 3, question. Do you know yet which New York influencers you will be working with? Tracy tells you she's in conversations with several well-known women in the fitness space who have a substantial number of social media followers. Step 4, position. Tracy, I think we're able to help you with this strategy and amplify it. Our female on-air personalities here in New York don't just have massive social followings. They are constantly recommending things they like on air to their listeners. And they do this in a very organic way. Radio is controlled word of mouth. You control the words, you control the number of mentions and impressions. It's a great complement to what you're already planning. Step 5, ask for acceptance. Let's schedule a video call for next week to talk a little more about this. I'll have some market segmentation data ready as well, which will be helpful for your launch. Is Monday at 2 p.m. good for you?